Our next speaker is Larry Wikelius. He's a senior director at Qualcomm on technical standards, and is also the treasurer of the RISC organization.
Thank you and good morning. One of the advantages of speaking on the last day of a conference is the ability to build on some of the themes that have been covered already this week and even amplify some of those messages. And hopefully I'm able to do that this morning in the brief time that I have with you. My focus today is on the RISC-V ecosystem and really how we can go big with that ecosystem and build on many of the foundational elements that we fortunately have in place today. I'm going to touch on specifications and ISA progress, really dive in a bit on commercial success, especially in the application processors and what that looks like, further areas to think about from ecosystem evolution, and some calls to action. Before I get into that, it's interesting in that just like RISC-V is celebrating a major milestone this year with the 15th anniversary, in July, Qualcomm will be celebrating our 40th anniversary. Our history is steeped very deeply in communications technologies, in cellular and mobile modem type markets. We've built on that recently with more areas of technology leadership, like our Snapdragon running Microsoft Copilot in the laptop arena, AI inference on the edge, and our digital cockpit for automobile. Part of our culture and strategy, really from the beginning, has been a significant investment in the standards arenas. 3GPP, a number of other very important areas for communication technologies, we have played a leadership role, which is consistent with our activity in RISC-V. So Qualcomm was a founding member of RISC-V International. We currently hold the chair position for the board of directors of RISC-V International, membership in TSC, and leadership in a number of task groups, SIGs, and some of our leadership recently in the certification activities. As was mentioned in the introduction, I serve on the governing board for RISE. Qualcomm is a founding member of RISE, and we see that as just another way to continue to invest and influence and help drive this important ecosystem. So we would actually use the kind of positioning of RISC-V International as an instruction set powerhouse. And I think it's important for this community to really embrace that and realize that. It's a testament to the open standards, the community investment, the fact that RISC-V International is now seen as an organization that consistently can define and deliver on a standard that is driving the future of compute in so many different areas. You know, if you look at some of the metrics here with the ISA, and I've got about 135 ratified extensions here. I think it could probably just change this week. The 5 profiles that you've seen referred to, and Kirsty touched on a little bit earlier this week, as well as the non-ISA specifications. All of these are a critical component of what makes RISC-V thrive and influence the community today. It's a reason why, as Qualcomm talked about in a previous RISC-V summit, the fact that we've shipped hundreds of millions of RISC-V cores in our products as well. Other vendors have talked about large volumes of shipments that they've had. So this is a foundation that we have to build on, and that is definitely something to celebrate. But it is really also a beginning for us in that our challenge is really to go from that ISA mindset to an ecosystem mindset. And we would say that applications processors are that next frontier, and to have that ecosystem mindset will enable that. So what do we mean by an ecosystem mindset? Well, really it's to start with a customer-first perspective. Look at things from a stakeholder's viewpoint. If you were fortunate enough to see Fabian's presentation yesterday from Scaleway, I think that was a great encapsulation of what this really means. Fabian talked about what it took for them, Scaleway, to ultimately deliver a RISC-V instance for the cloud. But that meant, I mean, they were literally bending sheet metal. They were working on low-level boot, kernel modifications, a lot of adjustments and changes to the existing components that they could start with. Now, fortunately, Fabian and his team had the technical expertise and the passion and commitment to see that through, but that's a pretty big hurdle for most users and customers. And so it's a challenge for us to understand that and to make it a lot easier for the next Fabian or Scaleway that comes along, which really brings me to my next point of it's got to be much easier for large number of newcomers without that expert knowledge or time or capability to deliver what they need and get access to what they need. That's where the ecosystem has to grow and evolve. Good news is we've got the building blocks ready, but they need a lot of polish and completeness. In the 1990s, there was an American author, Stephen Covey, who published a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of his foundational tenets was seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I think that's a good representation here for how we need to interact with the community around us. It's great to have the passion and the excitement about RISC-V, but we also need to understand where those other communities, those users, those partners are coming from, and really dive into what their needs and requirements are. Now, part of making that happen is investing in internal housekeeping. And what do I mean by that? I mean documentation, I mean training, a lot of the other elements that come together to make the community, the broader community, successful. And I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail in a following slide. We think the certification program is critical for consumers of RISC-V components. We think it becomes a key part of the RISC-V brand, and the RISC-V brand really meaning something from a technical perspective as well as from a market perspective. And again, that kind of underlies that ecosystem mindset that we think is definitely critical. And finally, the size of the pie is not fixed. And that's important in that it's an interesting dynamic of our community, right? We're both working together, but we're also competing in some ways. And the most important thing is that we really benefit by everyone else's success. By being able to point to success factors here, evolution here, delivery points here, that benefits us all and rises the tide for everyone. So when I talk about the ecosystem more than the ISA, if you just think about the starting point from even just an SoC, obviously we're building on the RISC-V ISA, but within that ISA, or within that SoC, there's a lot more than just the ISA. There's a CPU IP that has to be performant and competitive in the market. There's the other components in the SoC, such as various IPs that need both completeness, maturity, and support. And that is a core building block that must be enabled, must be supported, and requires much more than just the ISA itself. You've heard a fair amount this week, and I've been happy to hear so many presentations talk about the overall software importance, but also improvement as we look at the community progress. As we think about building on the ISA, and RISE is part of this in terms of driving more the infrastructure components for software, from compilers and tool chain to kernels, and as we build out a full OS and application ecosystem, having that software infrastructure in place, having that consistency of upstream support and enablement naturally builds on the broader communities. I think the Yocto announcement Tuesday morning here on stage was a great example of where having some of this infrastructure in place enables those communities now to join in with the rest of us in RISC-V, but also demonstrates how we can expand and build out our overall community connections. So how do we do that from an ecosystem perspective and maybe a segment perspective? There's not necessarily much low-hanging fruit left. I think 15 years of RISC-V has been able to address a fair amount of that. But so how do we kind of look at it from a least high-hanging fruit? Well, here's an example of ways to think about it. And the good thing about this slide is we've heard from representatives data center this week and automotive in particular about ways that those segments are looking at RISC-V. And a couple of themes to take away from this that I hope you see is that different technologies complement each other in segments. So, for example, multiple segments need hypervisors. Multiple segments need RAS. There may be more specific technologies and enablement for a specific segment, whether it be data center, automotive, IoT, what have you, but a lot of complementary technologies. And so the more we can build on those complementary components and ultimately work with segment leaders, segment customers, partners, technology experts to build out those stacks, the richer our offering can be. And as I say at the bottom, nothing moves an ecosystem like a competitive product. So I hope that over time we'll see more and more of these circles, but also more and more of the capabilities within the individual components and segments. So I mentioned improved housekeeping earlier. Let me touch on that a little bit more. I think the documentation has continued to improve for RISC-V, but it's critical to have a normative, rules-based specification that allows for a level of ecosystem independence, that allows for people outside our community to truly build products and have confidence on that foundation, to have a single reference model that the community, the members as a whole are aligned around, and make sure that that is incremented and integrated with the documentation. And architecture validation. This is a fundamental core to how we scale and how our partners can build on our underlying technology. So finally, just a call to action based on a number of the elements I touched on. You know, it's transitioning to thinking of RISC-V as an ecosystem. We have an ISA that's in place. We're going to continue to build on that to make it more and more competitive, but really thinking about the ecosystem as a whole. And in concert with that, a developer-first and customer-first mindset. I hope a year from now at the next EU Summit, we have many, many more customers on stage like we saw with Scaleway and EPCC and some of the auto members, talk about their experiences so that we can learn from and improve on for them. Getting that outsider feedback to identify the gaps that maybe we don't see because we're really down in the details. I touched on the housekeeping and making that more and more rock solid and consumable. But finally, a level of congratulations and really recognition of the work that it has taken to get to here and the foundation that we have to build on. Everybody in this room, RISC-V staff, those partners. So I think that is it's a great foundation to build on and something to celebrate and momentum to take forward. Thank you.